I'm not going into detail about the findings, but just to give you an idea of how we did the research. We do not only identify the challenges, but as I also said earlier, we make sure that positive deviance was captured, and also the opportunities that were created by the people themselves, by the actors who are involved in the social change processes, also have to make sure that we capture that. So what are the self-initiatives that we found? So it's like a seed that you need to water. So if the water doesn't, well, the logic, if the water doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which the flower, if the flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which the flower grows and not the flower itself. So what are the enabling environments which shows a positive? First, we found so many reading communities, lab socio, debate forum, literature studies, and these are scattered around small university, big university, private and private, disregarding status. Canteen as the best place for learning, and because they couldn't find this, as described earlier, a lack of intellectual academic freedom, so they create their own space, and they have this really engaging environment in the canteen where people can discuss many topics there. And also we found a culture of mentoring and networking at some university, and some already a few took initiative to make critical thinking as a teaching subject. So here is lectures doing one-on-one. As it guidance, mentoring on critical thinking with their students. So what are study implications? Since these study implications, you cannot apply the universal model. You need to contextualize the models a strategy of interventions. Because not all, for instance, not all academics are interested in doing research, and some actively prefer teaching. The commercializations result in limiting times. So there are different types of study implications where, like for instance, the access toward research fund require this targeting the seniority. So in the study implications, we're trying to address the different type of challenges for different groups, and which level that you are aiming for change, and how to connect it the change intervention strategy within the actors levels, within the enabling environment, and also in starter level. The regulations, starter level, regulations, rules, and law. This is examples for study implications specifically to address the needs and challenges that women academics have. So there are also, of course, challenges and opportunities for all academics. So I need to just identify which are the target groups that you would like to be involved in. So it's like a seed. You have to know where water, how and where and how much water that the seed needs. That's it. Maybe we can continue further discussions. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the other studies of household finance. So this is in the more traditional setting of the RCA, based around living with families who are living in poverty, and trying to understand the money and how they use the money. Okay.
I'm sorry for the inconvenience. We have some problem here. While we're waiting this to fix, please help yourself to have the coffee over there.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So, yeah, money is a lot more colourful than just a blank white screen. So a bit of background of study. So the study is trying to elicit the understanding of how people living in poverty perceive, handle, and manage their finances, their income, their expenses. In particular, this is seen as useful because the amount of money that goes to families through social assistance programs to actually really understand people's behaviours and how they use this money, how they potentially may be saving it, or what happens within the household. So the study participants, because money is quite a sensitive topic, we return to families that we've lived with before. And so we've been, or stayed with for different studies. And so the rapport's already been built up there, and so you have that basis to open up conversations from the very beginning. And so overall there were 34 poor households that we were living with, scattered around 11 different provinces, around 2,200 people who we were having insightful conversations with. This was April, May last year, and the commissioners were KSI and DFAT, with the reference group chaired by BAPNAS for this study. And the findings of this study were being used by BAPNAS for their national financial inclusion strategy, so feeding into that. So for the findings, so firstly, people perceived income as cash, and the cash is from wages or from selling. So this is something that we've seen has changed over the years as well, from when we started doing RCAs in 2009 in Indonesia. The more informal means of bartering and trading has decreased, and so farm food is no longer seen as income, or your own product is no longer seen as income, and it's really about money and the need to have money in the household. And so there was, within the communities we were staying for this study, there was, in the most remote communities in Maluku, there was still a little bit of bartering, but apart from that, it was much more about having to have the money in your house to be able to pay for regular expenses. And we'll have a look at those regular expenses shortly. So in order to have the money, there were multiple different income sources that families had. And so in all the families we stayed with, they all had at least one income source. Half of them had more than three, and in some families as many as 6 to 7. And so it's really juggling different jobs, different means to get income, so the family can have a more constant, regular income throughout the duration of time. So within this one here, this was in central Kalimantan, actually, with one of the families that I was living with, and this was illegal logging that they were getting the wood for, because they had tuition fees coming in for 3 juta to pay for the daughter who was in Ambon for the nursing school, and they needed this money straight away, and so they went out to get the illegal logging to get this money to pay for that. But they had various different means to get money and access money. So what people really wanted is to have this regular income, and the ideal job through this is the P&S type jobs. So to have that regular source of income and to have that consistent money coming into the household. And there were more unpredictable aspects to the climate change, the seasonality impacts, which impacted how they could get the money at certain times of the year. So either with fishing, with farming, but then Also, within that central Kalimantan community again, there was gold mining. And so gold mining during the rainy season was very difficult. And so in the rainy season, many of the families went pig hunting to get their income. So it's really kind of adapting to different needs at different times. So this is a depiction of the family expenditure. So across from all the families that were sharing their stories with us, as well as the discussions, we were using visuals to map out kind of expenditure income. And this would be using seeds or other items around about to have these more insightful conversations to try and understand how people were spending their money on a regular basis and a periodic basis. So the middle circle here are the regular expenditures, and across these locations it was based around these three core expenditures, which was food, cigarettes and snacks, and that equating to about 60,000 rupiah per day and fairly evenly split between those three. And then in the outer room we have the periodic expenses, which is some of them are linked around to life cycle changes, so around sort of having a baby and the cost of formula milk, schooling costs at various different stages of going through school and between different levels of school, as well as credit payments and religion. And we'll go through these and have a look at them in a bit more detail. So firstly, for the regular expenses. So food is number one in most people's recollection of what they think is the most costly item, but when it's been mapped out, it works out about the same amount as snacks and also cigarettes. But people see it as very important, obviously, you have the food on the table. So make sure you have the food on the table, so make sure you have the money available to pay for your regular food for your family. Snacks. So this is the same amount of money being spent on snacks as it was for food. And this is being a growing trend that we've seen across the RCA study since 2009. So let's have a look a bit more about snacks into the packet. So yeah, this growing trend in it replacing meals. So we're finding more and more that breakfast for children is being substituted by having snacks at school rather than breakfast at home. And it's partly around sharing the snacks with your friends, the social element of hanging out with your friends and eating together, rather than sort of having breakfast cooked at home. So some families in this study, it was 1.5 to 1.8 million a month being spent on snacks. And we've seen this growing desire and pressure from children to actually demand to have this pocket money. And the pocket money we've also been seeing has been increasing quite a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, to up to sort of 15,000 per day per child for some families. And this is a quote from West Java. To destroy the house. We have been living with families also where the door's been kicked down by the child who hasn't received his pocket money that day, and so real pressures coming on to the parents to provide this as a need for the children for them to buy snacks. And then on to cigarettes, so the Bapak's pocket money, as some of them were referring to it as. And so this is seen as, again, the equal proportion to food, snacks, and now cigarettes in many families as more of a necessity for the Bapak and making sure they have enough money for this. In this community in central Kalimantan, as I went back to that community, it was quite interesting that one of the children had actually given up smoking. And then he was realising how much money he'd saved as a result of that. So for him it was 1 million a month was being saved because he wasn't smoking. So as well as these three kind of regular expenses, there are some other regular costs coming in on it, which aren't as much but still do have implications. So firstly, electricity, so around about 30 to 50,000 per month. If there's a TV in a house, then obviously that goes up further. And mobile credit, so virtually all homes have at least one mobile phone, and a lot of discussions we're having in other studies for children, it's not so much about if they have a mobile phone, but what type of mobile phone they have. So it's kind of, it's a need for many people within communities to have this mobile phone to link into social networks and part of that friendship circles. And cooking fuel. So these are other kind of regular expenses coming through that the family have to pay for. So we look now at the outer ring, so at the periodic expenses that the households are paying for. So firstly, schools. So school is meant to be free, but then there's lots of other costs associated with schooling. And this has come out in a lot of the studies that we've been doing. And these costs range from 900,000 all the way up to 3.6 million per child per year, which is approximately 3 months' salary, or is approximately 1 year's cost for the food for the family. And these are coming from free schools. So what are these costs? These costs are associated, the largest costs being school fees and registration costs, going between different grades of school, from SDA to SMP and up to SMA, as well as the registration ones. Then there's the uniform costs, which up to 5 uniforms per child, and that we've seen from many of the studies being quite a burden on a lot of families. They have to have these uniforms. School maintenance costs, and those expenses being, firstly, the formula milk and the gifts per month being spent on formula milk. And then as well as that, there's not being able to work. So if the mother was working beforehand, or the father, they're not being able to work after the baby's been born. So loss of income through that. Then in a lot of the communities there were social pressures, and social pressures linked to church, the mosque, asking for periodic expenses to be paid in contributions. So this was in Maluku, one of the mothers, sharing that the church should be supporting them, but rather demanding money. And in this community, this is one of the donation boxes, but they also announced every week whose birthday it was, and you have to pay 10,000 to have your birthday announced. Which is, but what they would also do is then give warning about whose birthday is coming the week after. And so, if you didn't pay that 10,000, people would know, like, or you had been announced that you were going to have your birthday 2 weeks before, but then when that week came along, your birthday wasn't being announced, so you hadn't paid your 10,000. So it's kind of a way of publicly shaming people if you don't pay to have your birthday announced. You could apply that as well, yeah. Get some additional funding. And then this is related to the mosque community. But quite a lot of social pressures in a lot of the communities around needing to and obligated to contribute to religious institutions. Then there's good sport on credit. So within this photograph, most of the items there you can see are being bought on credit. So you've got the TV, the fan, the very big speakers there as well as the bed. And so a lot of items bought on credit, and the majority of the families that we were living with had some formal or informal ongoing credit arrangements, so regular repayments having to be made. For goods bought on credit, it was seen as quite a safe option though, and an easier option than cash loans, which we'll look at afterwards. The reason being because if you can't make that payment, then the goods can just be taken away. And so they'll be taken back by whoever provided that good. Whereas cash is a bit more complicated. If you can't pay it and you haven't got the cash, then it's more problematic. And this is a collector coming to try and get some cash repayment, and the public shaming that people felt around debt, around if their neighbours saw this debt collector coming and they couldn't repay, that they felt very not willing to make these types of risks in the community if they were going to take some money out. Especially because of the irregular nature of incomes and the seasonal nature of that, to have to make regular monthly cash payments or weekly cash payments could be troublesome. So, as summed up here, it's better to sell the assets rather than to actually borrow the money for cash. So in terms of savings, in terms of what families perceived about savings and also the behaviours around savings. So 1/3 of the families had no cash savings at all. And the families that did have cash savings, it was mostly kept in the purse by the mother of the family, who was managing the day-to-day finances of that family in virtually all cases. And then the father would be asking for his regular cigarette money, his pocket money, from the mother. In terms of banks, only 3 families were using a bank, and the reason being it was seen as remote, but this is not just from a distance point of view, but also psychologically. The kind of processes you have to go through to set up a bank account kind of detracted people away from those formal processes. How banks were being used were mostly for remittance money, for receiving remittance money, and also we've seen growingly in more recent times for social assistance also. In some communities, actually, the need to set up bank accounts to receive some social assistance. So there is some changes happening there. So where else would they be saving their money or saving their income? Chickens. Or rather, if the bank is too formal, then it's more ways which are easily liquefiable assets also. So chickens, goats, pigs, as a means to, if you have additional cash to invest in, and then when one of those periodic costs come along, such as school tuition fees, then you can sell that good to provide that money or the income for that. As well as that, a common one was gold. So gold can easily be exchanged later. And so families investing in gold, and then when they needed that money, they could sell that gold if need be. So some key points that we learned from this study. Firstly, cash. Money is really important now. So to actually have money in hand, and particularly for the regular expenses, to have that on a regular basis, the need for regular income. And related to that, having these different multiple sources to receive this income in different ways, to try and make it less unpredictable, the amount of money you're receiving. The costs around the family life cycles, so around having a newborn baby, then also different stages of schooling. There's high costs around those, and so some need to actually have additional income at those times. The women in the household, they're the ones who are managing the money. That was pretty uniform across all the households. They want easy ways to access the savings, so very tangible ways, if it's through gold or through livestock, so they can access the money straight away when they need to, rather than through the formal financial services such as banks being seen as a bit too scary, a bit too formal, complex in the systems to actually set up the accounts. And this aversity to debt and to having taking out cash loans and having these regular repayments, partly around being scared to make that payment, but then also the shame they can feel from their community members by being in debt and it visibly being seen to other neighbours. those are the two case studies that we'll go through today. There's a couple of concluding comments around about the whole RCA and those two case studies, and then we can have a discussion. So, firstly, around the SDGs and leave no one behind, the need to really embrace multiple perspectives and multiple realities and find ways to do this. So everyone's views being heard and listened to. The RCA here we've illustrated is one of the methods that can do this, and we've used it in different contexts now. So from living with household families in poverty to also the research culture, which is a very different context. And what the RCA is aiming to do is to also transform the sea field towards a sea field change, to try and connect policymakers to understand communities' experiences, what their perceptions are, what they're feeling, and so more informed, nuanced policies can be made. And then as particular as the SDGs are being contextualised into the national and subnational context, to try and embrace these multiple perceptions to ensure the policies and SDGs are aligned to people's realities and people's needs, which would lead to the more inclusive and relevant programs for people. Okay, Terry Gassi.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter and Yulia. So that is the reality check approach. Peter and Yulia have talked about how RCA help link people's voices to the policymakers, because there is no one intervention fits all, right? So they also explain that there are two RCA studies in higher education and home finances. Looking at the time we have left, I think we could have like 3 rounds of Q&A. So in the first round, we will address 3 questions. And yeah, I will start directly.